Every Sunday, I think most, if not all of you will know this, that there are 3 appointed readings plus 1 song. And we often do 2 readings, but during the summer we reduce it to 1. We very rarely do the Old Testament reading. That's going to change in the fall as well. Sometimes it's absolutely brilliant. And when I was preparing my sermons for the summer season and even heading into fall, because I think most of you will know that I start my fall theme, preparing for my fall theme in the spring, previous spring, obviously. I came across the Old Testament reading for today, and I just want to refer to it. I don't want to read the whole thing because it's rather long. But at some point, it would actually be worth, I think, doing a study on the particular topic dealt with in the reading. It's about building the temple. What's going on, it's during the life of King David. And as you know, King David was a warrior king. And despite the fact that he did some pretty awful things, mostly that had to do with the normal human impulses to jealousy and covetousness. Despite that, he was quite a man after God's own heart. Never, despite his own personal sins and foibles and, shall we say, kindly speaking, his missteps, never did he forget his love for God. He always loved God. There's a lesson for us right in there, that our love for God isn't determined necessarily by our behavior. Nonetheless, David was at a point where he had done most of his conquering that he was going to do in his life, and the people of Israel and he were at a time in their existence where things were pretty settled. And he found himself living in what is described as a cedar house. In some translations, some versions, it's a palace, etc., etc., etc. And this bothered him. It bothered him. And so he decided what would be appropriate was, since God was living in a tent, you know about that, because the people of Israel went on their journey, the Ark of the Covenant and all the stuff around the worship of God was in a mobile facility, that it just wasn't right that he was living in a cedar house, living, if you will, a pretty luxurious life, and God was living in a tent. And so he decided that he was going to build a glorious place for God to take up residence. Because as you know, in David's time, we believe that God literally lived in the Holy of Holies, that he took up residence in the Holy of Holies. And so he began to set up a process of making this happen. But what we hear through the prophets, through a particular prophet, was that God, I think the word rebuke sounds harsher than sometimes it is. We would use the word in common parlance, God challenged him on this. That's more of the nature of what a rebuke is. And said, no, have I asked you to build me this house? Have I asked you to build me a permanent residence? And in fact, God hadn't asked David to build him a permanent residence. And then the passage goes on to say that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that God is quite happy to live in the tent for now, because the journey isn't complete. But there will come a time, in the time of David's descendants, when he will want a permanent residence built. And as we know, Solomon's temple ultimately was built, and then the second temple was built as well. It's a wonderful story, and it's very evocative. And it's also a challenge to us in the church today to look at permanent versus transient structures. We come out of a culture of permanence. We come out of a settled urban environment. And whether we look back historically to the Victorian era or even earlier than that, our ethos, just our DNA, speaks of settled structures. Indeed, and I hope there's a relevance here for you, not just for me, I've been watching the Tour de France. As the Tour de France is winding its way through the streets and villages and towns and up the hills and down the hills and the mountains and all the rest of it, very often the helicopter that's following them focuses on a very old church, and they take a minute away from their bicycling narrative to talk about that church and some of its history. So our history of permanent structures goes back thousands of years, a couple thousand years. There's something in us that wants permanence. And I'm not suggesting that that's a wrong thing, as long as it's done appropriately and in a timely fashion. Because as well as being called to have permanence in the solid structures, we are also called to be a pilgrim people. We are no longer living in an age where Christianity can plant its flag and then expect people to rally around it. That's just not going to happen. That's not the culture we're a part of, that's not the ethos we're a part of. Indeed, if we wanted to use the image of flags, what we could say is everybody's planting their flag and trying to make it the brightest and best colors they possibly can to attract as many people as they can, whether there's any substance there or not. In fact, I was listening to something about the chaplaincy services offered for the Olympics starting up this week. See how topical I can be. For the Olympics starting this week, and it just amazed me how many chaplaincies were being offered to some very mainline, but also some not mainline at all religions. So we're good at planting flags and calling people to rally around them. But Christianity isn't at its essence like that. When Christianity is the main cultural presence or the main cultural religion, whether people really understand it or not, you can do that. You can put up a church, and if it's part of people's cultural ethos, they will come. But that's not what we're living in. We're living in a time when fewer and fewer people know in the first place what Christianity is about. And so planting a flag does not cause people to rally around. I always think it's funny, somewhat sad, but funny, when you drive by and see, for example, a church has put up a very poorly scribbled sign saying, "Vacation Bible Camp, join us." How many people do you actually think are actually going to be driving by St. John's Boulevard or whatever, look at that sign and say, "You know what? I haven't been to church in 43 years, and my kids have never been to church, but can't wait to go to that Bible camp." It's just not going to happen. Putting up the flags is not going to happen. What's going to happen is when we recognize that at the heart of Christianity is the notion of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage towards God, pilgrimage with God, pilgrimage of discovery, where we discover that at our center is a longing for God. And that just is a form of communication. So God says to David, now isn't the time. Now isn't the right time. We're still on a journey. We haven't got to the point yet where it's time to build structures. And I believe that there's a call to the church there. Not that I'm suggesting that we start dismantling St. Mary's, I do believe that there's a value, particularly with our weather patterns, to have a place of worship. But we shouldn't live and die for our places of worship. We should recognize that there is a call to be a missional people, to be a people who can articulate and demonstrate in their living the message of God's love and healing and reconciliation. And that needs to be lived out in the community. So I think, this is a thing, not a belief, I think that what we're going to see in the future, where churches are healthy, is there will be a gathered congregation, but it won't be huge, it won't be big. I think for most of us, even those of us who remember the days of churches with ordinary churches with 200 or 300 people on a Sunday, I don't think any of us, maybe my kids, are going to live to see that again. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think what we will see is very strong, faithful, committed, dedicated groups. And taking that commitment that we share in community, living it out in daily lives and in community, and building through, I'll call it friendship evangelism, relationships with people in the community. We will find that the gospel takes root, takes heart, and takes life where we are living our relationships. For some, that'll be in the place of business. For others, it might be by the school gate, just talking about what's going on. For others, it might be at their place of employment in staff care or teaching in Valleyfield or wherever. But I believe that's what we're going to see. That people will start considering again the truths of God based on the relationship they have with people whose lives have been affected and transformed by their faith and their belief. So, a little bit from the Old Testament reading. And because I wanted to say this, today you sort of get 2 half sermons, and that was the first sermon. This is something that we're going to need to talk about as a congregation, because one of the things that I'm seeing and very convinced of, when they train you in seminary, they don't really train you for the real world. They train you for the theoretical world. But I've always liked observing. and I like watching. And one of the things that I watch is the changes in the church and in the church's people, and I also enjoy watching the changes in society. And I'm not suggesting that I'm the most observant, nor am I suggesting that I'm the most aware, but there's things that I see happening in society that to me are archetypical, which means like, hold this up as an example of what is coming. I remember driving down St. Charles one day this winter and looking at the back of a bus that was advertising the Quebec Winter Carnival, and you know that ice hotel they built? They also were advertising the ice chapel that they built. Never had seen that before. To me, that represents a profound change in attitude, particularly in the province of Quebec. A couple of last year, before it burned down, Marie and I were treated to a night at Auberge de Galant up in Riga. A lovely supper and an overnight and breakfast. Sadly, it burned down. Anyway, I was talking to Lynn. You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about it after. It's not part of the sermon, and it's not God's judgment on it. Lovely food. But I was talking to Linda the next day because I know that they do weddings. And I asked her how many weddings they do a year up there. They do 100 weddings a year. And while I didn't pursue it, it was up to me to pursue it, and it was quite busy enough. But I was thinking, there ain't no way we're going to ever do 100 weddings at St. Mary's. But here's a way of connecting with people. Now, a lot of the people who do the weddings are just licensed and hired for $400 a shot to do it, and they have nothing to do with religion, even though some of them have gone down to Bertrand Fouché Bélanger, the Holy Hardware store, and bought a clergy shirt, so they look the part, but they're basically just hiring gunslingers. Perhaps not the most appropriate term, but it shows what I feel. But to have a minister in a position where most of the people that they're marrying are from our geographic area, perhaps it is incumbent on people such as myself and other ministers to make their presence known so that we connect in that way with people. I know it's fraught with difficulties, and policy decisions, but this is something that is going on that used not to go on. And one of the things that Linda said to me that was absolutely fascinating was people are asking for the religion component. They used to rent her place to avoid it. Now, when they rent a place, most ask for a religious component to the service. So I really believe society is changing. The church needs to change with it, not to sacrifice. We need to be rooted. I think this is actually a good line that I came up with. We need to be rooted in our tradition, not anchored by it. Okay? And that way we have the solidity of what we are, but the flexibility to respond to what's going on in society. I think that's godly. So, end of part one. Part two, lighter, less profound, but hopefully no less serious. If I was to say, Marie's not here, I wanted to know what Marie would say. She's probably gone to get coffee. There she is, she's back. I'm glad you're back. I just said to people, Marie's not here, and I wish she was, because I'd love to know what your answer to this question is. Folks, think for just a couple of minutes. I've allowed 3 or 4 minutes for this part. What's the best gift you've ever received? Now, I know I'm the best gift, by the way. But just try and the kids. Try not to think of, people and your kids and stuff like that. But the greatest, present you receive, whether it's birthday or Christmas. Does anybody have anything that just sort of stands out in their brain? The greatest present you've ever got? Go, Joe.
Confidence for me to go on and do what I'm doing.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is very profound. That was Claire, it was over. We weren't looking for anything that profound, but we'll take it. No, that's fine. Just what comes to your mind?
Valentine's Day when Annie was, 7 months old or so, and instead of going out for dinner, he set it up so that we had dinner here, and we had Annie with us.
Oh.
Because I was, she was too little, investing in everything, and so instead of being in a little restaurant, we had picked up all the pasta sauce and everything, and set up the table in your office.
Okay, guys, talk to her after the service
because
she'll tell you how it doesn't happen every year. But yeah, I just figured she really deserved a break at that point. So I laid it out here. Okay, Walter, best present you've ever received, best gift.
Well, it was a real nice treat. Mrs. Noy took me to Disneyland on my 50th birthday.
Wow.
How cool is that?
The big
That's
kid.
terrific. That's terrific. Wow. She didn't take me from my foot. Oh, I've never been to Disneyland. Anybody else? Best present you've ever received, best gift you've ever received. Think practical. Nobody else? Oh, you're Bethany, come on.
Okay, well, yesterday I jokingly said to Mim that the best gift she ever gave me was my Mastercraft drill.
Now, you'll have to understand,
No, that
Bethany,
was
here.
really jokingly. But I love to build stuff and to be handy. And if I didn't have a drill, I wouldn't be able to do it. It's great. Or I have very annoyed friends because I would keep borrowing their stuff.
Bethany needs friends.
We're very glad that she is exercising her gifts and talents and passions by building a new section of deck in our house, but that's another story. Okay, you know, if you said that, I got to tell the story. Here is a thing you never, ever, ever do with Bethany. One day, Bethany was over at our house, you know where I'm going, building a section to our deck. I don't think you had your drill at that point, but I had more than one drill, and she was at one end of the boards, I was at the other end of the boards with the deck screws, right? This guy comes over, who shall remain nameless. He still is alive, by the way, but comes over. And Bethany, she had learned, as we all do, who do this sort of thing, how to, you know, put the screws in without the drill bits chattering. You know what I mean when I say chattering? It just sort of skips out. Takes a little while to get your rhythm back, but she was just like, you know, this was cool. This guy comes over, and he is going to teach Bethany how to do it. Oh, mistake. The look that she gave him, anyway, no, and now she's got her own drill. There you go. Okay, good present. Anybody else? Come on. Tom, you were going to say something?
Oh, I would say the best gift is picking up a brand new grandchild.
Okay.
I've done that a couple of times now.
Cool.
Well, 7 times, I suppose.
Yeah. Did you hear that back? Picking up a grandchild. First time, yeah. Okay, cool. Okay. I thought this would be great. I don't want to be too sneaky, so I'll tell you what's on my agenda here. I think one of the things that God is calling us to, as a Christian community, is to share our stories, you know, and share our difficulties, sure, but also share our celebrations and our stories of what's good. And so I want to start, you know, working that into the mix a little bit more. But what I want to do with the second half of my sermon time is talk about a gift that I received. Actually, it's a gift that Marie and I both received. And it was from my dad. Probably not all of you know this, but my dad passed away in 2003 on Christmas Eve, which on the one hand was a very, very difficult thing. I found out just a couple of minutes before my late service. But on the other hand, if you please just sort of understand what I say, it was also a beautiful thing. It was interesting because I come into the service and, you know, Huguette knew that there was something wrong. She could just tell that something was wrong. But I was not about to say at the service that I had just got the news that my dad died. But that whole process, and the support was good. But one of the things that I cherish is that in the previous years, in fact in years after my mom had passed away, which was about 5.5 years previous to that, my dad and I had reconnected. It's not that we were ever estranged in a way that we were talking to each other, but it would be fair to say that my dad and I, we sort of lived in different worlds. And my mother was, I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but she's a very anxious person for all sorts of reasons, some of which are very legitimate. And she really had difficulty when my dad was not within her view or within her immediate, which if she called and he wasn't around, she got very uptight. My dad loved boats. He was a Navy man, and he chose Navy because he loved the water and boats. My dad had some boats. I think it's the yacht club. But even though he had a sleeper board, he had never spent one night on his boat while my mom was alive because she would worry too much and be anxious. So his life was kind of constrained. But after my mom passed away, it opened up. And then I'll say this, and I mean it. I don't use cheaply. I hope you never think that I use it cheaply. But I will say that God blessed him with Ruby. He met a woman at the cardiologist's. There you go. And Ruby was a treasure. Ruby was just an absolutely precious, precious person. And it was a real blessing to my father. And they were together a few years. It was so interesting, so wonderful in those years to watch my father open up. He had grown up in very difficult circumstances. My dad grew up in the East End of Montreal during the Depression. Without getting into any of the details, if my dad was growing up today in the same circumstances, he would definitely not have been left in custody of his parents. And his parents could easily have been in jail. The stories that I heard, and in fact I was the only one of the three Tardy children that actually got to hear the stories. There were times in my life where my dad just needed to tell the stories and the details, the abuse that he suffered. And so there was tightness about my dad, and emotion for him was very, very difficult. When he went to sell the house that we'd grown up in NVG, and it was the only house he'd ever owned. He had bought it in 1958. I was 2 years old, my sister was 6. Daryl was just about to be born. This was the only house he'd owned. This is the only house we knew. When he went to sell it, after my mom passed away, because he didn't need anything that size anymore, I was standing in the dining room with him one day, and he said, "You know, Lorne," he says, I don't know. He says, "There's something broken in me because I don't feel anything, and I think I should." And he felt that it should upset him to be selling the only house that he had owned and in which his children had grown up and gone through school and college and graduated and married and stuff like that. But he didn't feel anything. And so the consequence of him and his upbringing and the environment that he lived in was devastating. The other thing, like some of you, he grew up in the Depression. And so he had a very particular, and one might even say peculiar attitude towards money. I see it obviously less and less now in parish ministry. I used to see it a lot more when I was younger in ministry, like 20 years, 25 years ago. People brought up in the Depression often have a very particular attitude towards money. And it manifests itself sometimes, and we can be critical, and we can use all sorts of sarcastic and very unkind phrases to describe it. But it is, if you've got any money, hold on to it as tight as you can because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. He grew up in the Depression in the East End. His mother owned a rooming house for young ladies. Okay, so that's the environment that he was brought up in. And his father worked in the refineries in the East End and was, like my mother's father, a heavy drinker. And the more he drank, the more abusive he got. So that's a little bit of the story of my dad. And so as my dad aged, the things that had, and by the way, he and I have talked about this long before he passed away. He knew that it was part of the story and important. He got tighter and tighter. And we tend to, unless we tend to have our hurts healed or get our hurts healed, they do tend to make us tighter and tighter. And so for him, one of his greatest insecurities, indeed the thing, amongst others, but the thing that he hung his insecurities on was finances. Because there's a lot of things that you can't control in life. You can't control your health. You can't control your relationships a lot of the time. And my dad had cardiac problems that he couldn't control, and so the thing that he could control to the best of his ability was his money. And so he did it. The locks were closed, the safe was barred, the security guards were there. You do not let anyone know how much you got. You do not share it. You hold on to it. Because if you don't need it today, if you're okay today, something may happen and you're going to need it tomorrow. And that's the way he was. But then, at a particular time, And it was not because of his relationship with Ruby, but it was in the whole ethos. Very late in his life, my dad started to blossom. And frankly, becoming a part of this community, his church, was part of that. He did say to me on more than one occasion, having come to church regularly, and meeting people like you and all the rest of it, he said to me, Lorne, you don't know how many times I wanted to do this. And one time we were sitting he was sitting and I was working on the piano in my driveway on the Florida Drive those days, and we were having rye and ginger at the end of the Saturday, and he says, you don't know how much this means to me. You know? So there was something going on in him. Well, there came a day, and it wasn't because of, but it was around the time that Murr and I were buying our house. And when you buy your first house, I think probably most of us who bought a house can share in this experience. Those who don't share in it are blessed. You're looking for the money for the down payment, you know? And I got to tell you, when you're a minister, saving money for a down payment on a house is, and so Murr and I give her credit for this. If it wasn't for her, we would not have bought the house. She was the one who was, we're going to do this. And I was nervous, hesitant too. But it was, the right thing, the right time, the right opportunity. But then you got to write this honking check for the down payment, and the government allows you to take $20,000 out of your RSP, et cetera, and you're there. Or I was there, and okay, so I got that, and we got this, got a little bit over here. Do we have enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My dad did something that he never, ever had done before. He had sold the house in NDG that we grew up in for what he considered to be a ridiculous amount of money. Like in the 50s, he paid $17,500 for it. And so he just could not believe it when the real estate agent told him what they were going to list it for. And they sold it for just a couple thousand less than that. It was just amazing. And he just couldn't believe how much money he had. Plus, he managed to squirrel away money over the years. And so he was looking at his bank account and realizing, and you've got to understand my dad, kind of earthy in some ways, that he was going to be dead and decomposed long before he got to spend it all. And so he wrote us a significant check. It would be indiscreet and inappropriate to say how much that check was for. We are not talking half the value of the house, but we're also not talking about just a nice dinner at Le Gourmand or something like that. We're talking about a significant check. Then, of course, to be fair, he gave an equal check to my sister and my brother. Now, I knew this was going to happen because we had spoken about this. They did not know. And so all of a sudden, they're each getting an envelope. Why is Dad writing this a letter? And they opened the envelope. And my brother, I can see the look on his face now. I had never seen a look like that on my brother's face. My sister didn't know what to say. So of course she just started saying anything that came to mind, because that's the way Joy reacts. We all reacted according to type. But the thing that I remember more than anything else was the look on my father's face. That he saw what he had done. Now, he knew how much he had helped Marie and me. We probably still would have bought the house, and we probably would have, but he knew that really helped. But looking at the grin that he had on his face when Daryl and Joy opened their envelopes, and then he looked at me, because this was a secret that he and I had, that they didn't know. He made me swear. Like, he threatened me with physical violence if I told him what was going to happen. He didn't mean it, but he did, to threaten me. I had never seen a grin like that on my dad. I'd never seen that. And it was spectacular. And I thought of so many phrases that are really cliches. Like, the gift blesses the giver as much as it blesses the receiver. And I thought, all those things about that sort of experience that are cliches or become cliches, they're true. They're true. Because by the gift, my dad was blessed in a way that in the whole of his 70 plus, almost 80 years, he was at that point, maybe even 80, he had never experienced it in his life. Never experienced it in his life. Yeah, he did good for his 3 kids. There's no question about it. But what a great joy it was. And joy isn't enough of a word. I don't know what word is a good enough word. What an incredible and transformative thing it was for him to do this for his children and to see their reaction and to know that his life and all he'd been through to come to this point of being able to do that was blessing his children. It was blessing his children. And that became a blessing to him. So the question that I have, and I'm not suggesting that everybody goes home, looks at their bank account, and decides to write a large check to their relatives. Though, if that comes out of this sermon and it's appropriate in your context, that's not a bad thing. But what I want to ask you and to challenge you to think is, in what way can you gift somebody? And I'm not suggesting that we sort of go mentally through the list of people, but I would bet that for some of you, even as I'm saying this, you're thinking of something that you could really gift and bless with a gift. Now, I'm using an example from my father's life and my life, and it had to do with money. And we don't live and die for money, but money is important in our culture for what it can accomplish and what it can do. But a phone call that you need to make, and you've never made because either it's awkward or challenging, or you just don't want to, or there's a strain in the relationship, you don't know how it's going to go, so it's just something always keeps coming up that prevents you from making that phone call. I know it's getting a little archaic these days, but a letter that needs to be written. It's easy to fire off emails these days, but a letter that needs to be written. Or maybe it is a particular gift. You know someone, maybe not a relative, maybe a friend, maybe an acquaintance, and you know that there's something that it starts sounding silly when they try to give it context, but that you can do for them. And we do these things not for the blessing, but knowing that in them there is a blessing. There's a blessing to the gifted, and there's a blessing to the gifter. About a third of the way into this, I spoke a little about my father's life, and how his environment constrained him in a particular direction. And yes, indeed, we all do have choices, and all of us respond to the things in our lives, the good and bad, in different ways. And we all have good and bad in our lives. And it does pattern us. And I was saying that quite late in his life, my father found it through different circumstances, etc., found it possible that even at the end of his days, the damage and the hurt and the pain that he had suffered growing up by his context could be transformed. And by being transformed, his life became a blessing to others in a way that he couldn't have envisioned previously. And it became a blessing to him as well. What I'd like to say is, when we invite God into our lives, the whole of our lives, the pains as well as the joys, but all that we are, and invite him to do his transforming work directly in us, through others, through choices, etc., It is incredible what God does. It is incredible, the transformation. And often, not always, often, we are privileged ourselves to see the blessing to others, and that blessing gets reflected back. Amen. So let's just spend a couple of minutes thinking in prayer about our lives, about our hurts, about our joys, the things that bring us life and the things that rob us of life. Offer that to God, and then ask Him to bless us so that we can be a blessing to others. Let's pray. God, our lives are a mixture of so many things we don't even need. You know more than we do. Joys and sorrows, difficulties, challenges, opportunities, successes, failures, the whole gamut. And it's obvious that these things affect us positively and negatively, sometimes positively in ways that we don't even know, and negatively in ways that we can't even see. But we also acclaim and proclaim you as a God of transformation and a God of healing. You are a God of resurrection and new life, a God of hope in the midst of despair and calamity. We offer you our lives. It's easy to say, look over here, God, at this video of the good stuff. But also, we do acknowledge, at least intellectually, perhaps not always in our hearts, that you are in the shadow and the darkness, bringing life from death. So we offer you the difficulties, the challenges, and the darkness as well. And we pray that you would heal us of our hurts, transform us by your light. Let your resurrection power resurrect our spirits, our souls, our bodies. Lord, through your transforming greatness, you bless the world. And we ask you to use our lives to be a blessing to others. Open the eyes of our hearts to see who, how, and if there's a way, something we are or something we have can be a blessing to other people. And we ask you this not only for the blessing that it is for us, but certainly including that. God, we like to smile. We like to see the joy of others. We like to celebrate. And thank you that smiles and laughter, love and friendship are a part of our Christian faith. And as the words from the traditional service go, we offer you ourselves, our souls, our bodies, to be a reasonable, holy, and living sacrifice. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Amen.